So perhaps I'm dense, but I really don't understand the disagreement. We're all here in this anarchist forum because we are crusaders against injustice and exploitation. However, exploitation can only exist if a person has some claim to something and it's taken away without their consent. We understand if the person gave consent, then it's not taking, it's giving, it's charity, that's great. But I think this is what Victor was talking about when he responded to a response of his video about property rights, when he asked why the taking of Native American lands was bad. Well, it must be bad because it belongs to the Native Americans and not the Europeans. But, how do we know this is the case and not the opposite? That maybe the Europeans had a more justified claim. How do we decide who gets what? Humans, like all animals, want to maximize resources to provide for themselves the most comfortable, enjoyable life. The problem is, these resources are limited. So again, how do we know who gets what? And this brings us to ethics. When we're looking at an ethical principle or guideline, something's good or bad, valid, whatever, we must, as rationalists, accept one, what is most universal, and two, what is most internally consistent. So in other words, we can't have a principle that does not extend to a particular geographic zone or one race or one gender or one day of the week, whatever. Now, I think there's two things that both Ancoms and ancaps, should agree on, and that's the individual person owns himself and owns his labor. The ancaps say government is stealing labor and lives, so it must be gotten rid of, and the ancoms say, yeah, that, and it extends to a capitalist class, a class of people who own capital, something like that. We can deal with that, but for a moment, let's make sure we're on the same page in terms of, individual self-ownership. Firstly, if an individual does not own himself, then, or his labor, then it's not up to him, at least not singularly, how to decide how to use his body or his labor. If it's the case, then there's no such thing as theft or murder. If my body or labor doesn't belong to me, then it's not murder or theft to take it from me. It wasn't mine. It's, I guess, owned by someone else. And secondly, you cannot refute self-ownership without using self-ownership. To argue against self-ownership is a self-destructive statement. This is explained much better and in more detail by Stephan Molyneux in a video I'll post below in the YouTube notes. But the argument breaks down as follows. The content of an argument cannot contradict the form of an argument. So for example, as Steph states, if I write a letter to you and in that letter make the argument that mail never delivers and words have no meaning, well, we don't even have to get into a discussion about the nature of words, communication, or the mail, blah, blah, blah. We know that this argument made is disproved by the fact that the person, one, used the mail, it did deliver, and the person is using words to make the argument. So words must have meaning, and the mail must deliver, or else he wouldn't have used it. This is what we mean when the form of an argument cannot contradict the content. It's also what we mean when we say ethical principles must be internally consistent. And yeah, as a starting point, we know that individual self-ownership and ownership of labor are valid. Whatever we build from there, wherever we go, when we're trying to solve hunger, poverty, crime, whatever, we cannot go against this foundation. Just as in math, we start with 2 + 2 = 4 as the foundation, and whatever theory we come up with from there, we don't have to go through the pages of proofs to disprove it if it says it starts with the premise 2 + 2 = 5 as a foundation. We can just write it off. So, okay, so yeah, a man needs food to survive, and what happens if a person does not have enough food? Well, yeah, that's a legitimate problem, and we can get to that. But we know that the answer to that problem cannot involve breaking the foundation. As we've just shown, we cannot use enslavement or theft to solve these social problems. And the foundation, this is where we get the non-aggression principle and property rights, which is nothing more than mixing your labor with the material world to produce something. People can choose to cooperate with each other in infinite numbers of organizational and managerial forms, communes, co-ops, an apprenticeship, whatever. But it has to start at the bottom with the building blocks of individual consent. To push individuals into an organization, a collective, without their consent is just another form of slavery. And, as anarcho-communists, you say you want to do it voluntarily and that you won't forcefully absorb, something outside of your organization, your sphere of economic, production. And yeah, that's great. Um, and, I think this is what Victor is talking about when he says, how could it not be possible that individual ownership would still exist, at least somewhere, in contrast to total collectivization of everything everywhere. Now, it may be that collectivization is the most happy and efficient managerial form out there, and individuals following their own self-interest of wanting to be happy and get stuff, whatever, all flock to collectivize their capital and their property. That may be the case, but at least in the short term, a great many people will be skeptical of this and will prefer to trade as a sole proprietor over their property. That's the form of organization that they want. How is it not possible that this would happen? Again, at least in the short term. So to all those who extol the virtues of collective forms of management over individual forms, I ask, okay, how will you make that case? Are you going to do it by example? And we're assuming it's a stateless society. So will you do it by example? Or are you going to show people how great it is? Or are you going to put a gun and absorb them, keep forcing people outside of your organization to come into it and to adopt that style of organization? Yeah, assuming you know what's best for everyone else. If your system's better, just show it, prove it. I'd certainly be interested to see. And now, I've heard, and I probably will get some responses along the lines of, we won't be given the space because the capitalist will snag it all, and or this will just lead to wage slavery, or this will lead to an economic warfare and lead back to the state. I gotta tell you, that's all meaningless. It's all meaningless. It's what we call an argument from effect, and it's not worth anything. It's the same BS that was given about slavery. If you free the slaves, they'll run wild, they'll rape women, and they're not educated, they'll destroy society. It's the same BS that a monarchist probably gave the first proponent of a republic or democracy. You'll have factions, it'll be deadlocked, you won't be able to act in time, you'll be vulnerable to takeover by a other king. No. This is not, how we move forward. We start with first principles and build from there. That's how we know slavery was inherently evil and monarchies had to go. It's really annoying, I know, but you gotta stick to those foundations. And when it comes down to it, we have no idea what a free society in the future will look like. 200 years ago, no one thought of the internet or email or space travel. So how can you possibly claim to know what the best specific managerial style that everyone should organize by? What arrogance is that? How can you pretend to know what the beautiful future of a free society and all of its social experimentation, how do you pretend to know what it will look like? And, shame on you if you claim to know what's best for everyone and how others should live their lives and you're willing to force them into that. Shame on you. If you're an anarchist, in other words, a voluntarist, what's the disagreement? Let's drop the adjectives.